Well, hello and welcome to Faith, Philosophy and Life with me, Mr. Shelton. It's great that you're with me again. Today we're looking at a biggie. We're looking at someone of faith who I'm sure you have heard about. His name is Martin Luther King, and he changed the world massively. We've got lots to go through today. A lot of this is going to be your own learning at your own pace, and this may well take a couple of lessons as directed by your teacher. But to start with, I have a dream today, one of his famous speeches. Here's an extract from it.
When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. That one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. When we let it rain from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Okay, I wonder if you have any idea what it is that he's talking about. Well, hopefully we're going to unpack that today. So go and grab a pen and paper, because here's our cheesy intro music. So, our title today is How did Martin Luther King overcome prejudice and discrimination? How did Martin Luther King overcome prejudice and discrimination? And today we're going to explore how Martin Luther King's faith changed the world. And we're going to do this by reading and extracting information. Let's just confirm our understanding of prejudice and discrimination. Prejudice is where you judge someone before you know them, and discrimination is when you act on that prejudice, so you do something. So discrimination then is all about acting on your prejudice. Okay, so prejudice is the thought and discrimination is the action. So a good outcome will be that you can describe how Martin Luther King did change the world. It's going to be great if you can explain how his faith impacted his life, And it's going to be even better if you can say if his faith actually made a difference, or whether he would in fact have done these things because he was a black person and he wanted equal rights with white people. During today's lesson then, we've got an information pack, big questions, a storyboard, a mind map and a mountaintop speech to look at as well. A lot of this is going to be down to you to do. It might take one lesson, it might take 2 lessons. Be guided by your teacher. So my first question for you is this. If there was one thing you could do to change in your life, to change or improve the world, what would it be and why? If there was one thing you could do in your life to help improve or change the world, what would it be and why? So pause me now and try and come up with a paragraph of information about what you think you could do to try and improve the world around you. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get under the hood of what's happening in 1950s America here. Because if we don't understand what's happening in 1950s America, we don't understand the impact that Martin Luther King had. So you can see here some images from the States in the 50s and the 60s, and they are quite shocking. So you've got the idea of restrooms, toilets, where black and white people were separated. You've got the idea that there was job adverts where only white people could apply. You've got the idea of in trains where there was segregation, where black people sat in one part of the train and white people sat on another. You've got drinking fountains, the water fountains, where blacks and whites had very different qualities of water fountain. The sign just above my head is about zoos, and it says that only white people are allowed in the zoo on that particular day. And then just behind me is the sign that says that we wash white people's clothes only. Okay, so just imagine if you were a black person in the States, how much value you would have felt that you had in that society. And this is the world that Martin Luther King was growing up in. This is the world that Martin Luther King wanted to change. Martin Luther King was an American pastor. He was a vicar, and he had obviously very strong beliefs in God. He believed that everyone should be equal and that everyone was made in the image of God. He also knew the Old Testament very well, as you would expect. There was a bloke called Moses in the Old Testament. I know you will have heard of him with the plagues of Egypt. Moses didn't make it to the promised land, to Israel. He was taken to a mountain or taken to a mountain, and God said go up there, and Moses could see the promised land. He could see where the Jewish people were going to go, but he knew he wasn't going to get there because God had said he was going to die. He was very, very old. There were other reasons as well. So Moses stands on the mountaintop and he says, I can see where you're going to go. It's going to be amazing, but I'm not going to get there with you. And Martin Luther King does exactly the same. The night before he was killed, he gave the mountaintop speech. His mountaintop speech. He gave a speech that said, I'm not going to get there with you, but you are. I know this is inevitable now. I'm going to play that speech to you. What I'd like you to do is in the description below, you will find a link to the text of this. And while you're listening to it, I'd like to do a light bulb for the things that amaze you, a question mark for the things that you don't understand, highlight things that you think are just really inspirational or key quotes. Okay, so light bulb, question mark, highlight. Any questions at all that you've got, then please send those through to your teachers or your friends, because we'd love to have a look at those and maybe try and answer some of them as well. So this is about 7 minutes long, this speech, but as I say, it's a really important speech in his life. It was his last speech that he gave, so I make no apologies for playing the whole lot to you, but use that description below, get that loaded up, and I'll take you to the next bit in a moment.
You know, several years ago I was in New York City autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." The next minute I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. Yes. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. And I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And I want to say tonight, that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960, when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961, when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962, when Negroes in Albany, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. The black people of Birmingham, Alabama, aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama, to see the great movement there. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We're sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane. We had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Okay, so we're now going to go on to our final part of this activity. Now, this might take you a good hour, hour and a half if you do this thoroughly, which is why I said at the start it could be one lesson, it could be two. So do whatever it is, however long you believe that you've got for this task. But it's really important to get into the depth of Martin Luther King. So you'll find in the information link below a storyboard PDF. This will go through the Rosa Parks bus boycott story, which links into Martin Luther King. You'll find a storyboard with that as well that you can print off and then colour in or add information to, or you can do it all yourself if you wish to. You'll find an information pack to read that will give you some information on Martin Luther King, which is really important to read for some of these other tasks as well. I'd like you to create 10 questions with answers. 10 questions with answers. That means that you have a question on one side and an answer on the other, or you can just list it straight down in your book if you'd rather. The purpose of that is that you can then contact a friend and say on WhatsApp or Messenger and say, you know, I've got this question, what's the answer, and quiz each other on it, so you can involve each other with that. There's a reflection question sheet as well for you to work through. These are some really big questions that I'd like you to really think about when you come up with those, like what top 10 words would you come up with about Martin Luther King's life. And there's a mind map for you to look at as well to extract some information from. So the idea is really straightforward. If you've got 45 minutes left of this lesson, then you go through and you do as many of those as you can in 45 minutes. If you know you've got 2 lessons for it, then you work through all of them. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time. Stay safe, wash hands, God bless you, and I'll see you soon. And I hope you find this just as inspirational as I did putting it together. Take care.